Halo, selamat siang teman-teman semua, Bapak dan Ibu. Senang hadir kembali di tengah-tengah teman-teman insurance. I feel at home. Baik, Bapak dan Ibu, saya akan bicara soal talent trend dan Candy Dai, my colleagues from Mercer Asia, itu akan bicara soal key people consideration in separation atau in spin-off. Why? Because we know Indonesia is very exotic for business. A lot of people wants to invest, dan juga kita tahu bahwa OJK mengharuskan perusahaan banking maupun insurance untuk melakukan spin-off mungkin at the latest 2024. That's for my understanding. Oke, silahkan kita bisa mulai slide saya. Yang akan saya bahas adalah changing the talent landscape in insurance industry. Next please. Nah, Bapak dan Ibu, yang ingin saya katakan adalah life insurance atau insurance industry must change. Otherwise, we will be obsolete. Kita akan ketinggalan. Ya. Ada 4 challenge yang saya ceritakan di sebelah kanan. Yang pertama adalah increasing agility, merupakan suatu hal yang penting supaya kita bisa demands the changing of the world. Challenge yang kedua adalah we find out a lot of new industry player, insurance tech, gitu ya. Di mana teman-teman insurance tech ini biayanya lebih murah, they are very agile. So this is the challenge for our conventional industry. Yang ketiga, new expectation from regulator, from customers, from our own employees, from our shareholders, stakeholders. Ini mengenai ESG perspektif, ya, environmental, societal, and governance. Dan yang terakhir, uneven regulatory landscape dan economic environment. Kita tahu Indonesia diramalkan menurut kami di Mercer, inflation tahun depan akan naik menjadi 6,1 dari 4,7 tahun ini. Jadi kami meramalkan, ya kalau kita lihat inflasi naik, biasanya yang naik interest rate gitu ya. Nah saya nggak tahu ini artinya positif atau negatif buat teman-teman di insurance. Tapi we are facing what we call stagflation. Gitu ya, ini adalah bahaya ekonomi yang mungkin kita akan hadapi. Nah mengenai talent trendnya sendiri Bapak dan Ibu, ada 4 hal yang ingin saya tekankan. Dan ini akan saya bicarakan selama 15 menit presentasi saya sebelum saya hand over ke Candy Dai. Yang pertama, employees di insurance industry itu energize, satisfy. Bekerja di insurance industry, satisfy. 92% employee yang bekerja di life insurance industry bilang bahwa mereka satisfy working in their companies. 93 employee satisfied, in the current position. Tapi 65% life insurance industries itu melaporkan bahwa mereka mengalami higher turnover dari yang sebelumnya. Mungkin teman-teman siapa yang merasakan tahun ini turnovernya lebih tinggi dari tahun sebelumnya? Boleh angkat tangan? Oh, hampir the whole ya. Jadi kita bisa ngelihat bahwa ini dialami oleh life insurance industry. Yang kedua, flexible working. Flexible working here to stay, tapi operasionalisasinya yang membutuhkan kerja berat. Kenapa Bapak dan Ibu? Karena ini mindset dari eksekutifnya. Eksekutif itu bukan HR ya, chief yang lain selain chief HR officer. Mereka bilang bahwa they like to see their staff in the office. Padahal kami juga menemukan 67% dari employees bilang bahwa remote working bikin work-life balance-nya lebih baik. So you can see the challenge here. Yang ketiga, changing customer preferences ini membuat karyawan kita butuh skills yang baru. Ya, 63% C-suite bilang bahwa mereka meramalkan kita kesulitan meng-hire the right talents. Tell me, siapa di antara teman-teman yang merasa kesulitan meng-hire right talent saat ini? Ada yang mau angkat tangan? Oke, hampir semuanya juga ya. Nah, dan yang terakhir Bapak dan Ibu adalah intensify focus on ESG, ini membuat kita harus juga achieving goals in sustainability and diversity goals. Kita tahu kalau CEO kita presentasi misalnya Manulife presentasi di Toronto selalu melaporkan ESG goals-nya seperti apa. Itu adalah tuntutan zaman sekarang. We cannot move away from that. Oke? Mungkin saya lanjut langsung. Bapak dan Ibu kita bahas yang pertama. Boleh next slide? Nah, kalau teman-teman di life insurance want to remain competitive, ya, kami mengatakan you need to work on creating, communicating, and doing cross-functional career path for your employees within the organization. Ya, nah, jadi kita bisa lihat di sini, ini adalah cara untuk meng-attract dan retain key talents. Menurut employee engagement insight kami di Indonesia, karirnya merasa nggak bisa di-achieve di company-nya yang sekarang itu merupakan faktor yang paling rendah di Indonesia. Artinya apa? Karir adalah satu hal yang diperlukan, ya, buat kita stay dan engage. Kita bisa lihat di sini apa yang bisa dilakukan oleh teman-teman HR team di insurance. Pertama, redesigning model career dan pathways, ya. Yang kedua, identifying which roles yang might be benefit from hybrid working. Yang ketiga, identifying which role most suitable untuk job sharing. Jadi kita tahu sekarang flexibility modelnya macam-macam teman-teman. Salah satunya adalah job sharing gitu ya. Tadinya job dipegang satu orang, nanti dipegang 2 orang. Gak perlu hire orang baru maksudnya. Dan yang terakhir adalah identifying which skills atau pekerjaan yang bisa dikasihkan ke gig workers. Nah, pertanyaan besarnya adalah sebenarnya are we doing this enough? Gitu. Apakah career path yang kita punya udah oke atau belum? I give you one example Bapak dan Ibu. Salah satu organisasi besar di Indonesia yang selalu ada di top 3, top 5 universum as the best employer branding in Indonesia itu mulai mengalami kesulitan meretain talent-talentnya, terutama digital talentnya, dan juga meng-attract talent-talent yang baru. Nah, ini top loh, top of the popnya. Nah, mereka sendiri sekarang udah merasakan sulitnya itu. Fine. Nah, jadi ini yang kita bisa bilang bahwa are we doing this enough untuk meretain our employee? Dan tadi saya bilang faktor yang paling besar yang membuat employee kita meninggalkan perusahaan kita adalah apakah karirnya udah mentok sampai di sini saja. Kalau mereka nggak bisa melihat light at the end of the tunnel for their career, they will try to find someone else. Nah, yang kedua, kita bicara soal flexible working tadi. Next. Saya bilang di sini, walaupun ada clearly perception about remote working, tapi insurers are making progress towards sustainability model in 2022 gitu ya. Kita bisa lihat di sini Bapak dan Ibu bahwa 88% dari life insurance HR respondents bilang bahwa employees itu will join atau stay at the company yang offer remote atau hybrid working. Artinya apa? Kalau teman-teman semua nggak meng-offer remote working atau flexibility in working, you will be leave behind oleh our employees. Dan kita akan sulit. Itu sebabnya kenapa flexibility ini lalu menjadi bagian penting dari talent value proposition. Ya. Nah, apa caranya teman-teman? Kita bisa bilang di sini institutionalizing flexibility into their cultural norms. Jadi bukan hanya aturan tapi udah menjadi budaya, gitu ya. Yang lain misalnya offering flexible working collaboration training for employees. Juga yang terakhir offering tools dan platform support remote workers soal emotional dan well-being-nya. Oke, itu yang kedua. Yang ketiga kita lanjut ke masalah skills Bapak dan Ibu. Kita bisa lihat di sini bahwa bisa dibilang bahwa our employees itu are eager to learn. Kita lihat figures yang ada di sebelah kiri gitu ya. Employees kita itu mau belajar, merasa bahwa mereka akan diberikan kesempatan untuk belajar, tapi apa yang diminta oleh company-nya itu belum sesuai. Artinya ada ketidaksesuaian antara apa yang mereka pelajari dengan apa yang dianggap penting oleh organisasinya. Bapak dan Ibu. Nah, di sini kita bilang apa yang bisa dilakukan oleh teman-teman di HR dan eksekutif, designing talent process around skills. Jadi hiringnya based on skills, learningnya based on skills, successionsnya based on skill. Promoting skills-based talent mobility, ya. Kemudian juga misalnya di sini kita bilang utilizing AI untuk bisa mempredik skills mana yang kurang di tempat kita, skills mana yang udah bagus, dan skills-skills ini kita bisa find out di mana. Di Mercer kami punya tools, punya partner yang bisa membantu Bapak dan Ibu untuk melakukan hal itu. Dan kalau saya masuk ke slide saya yang terakhir. Nah, ini regulators semuanya ngomong soal ESG, gitu ya. Dan by the way teman-teman, life insurance company soal ESG merupakan salah satu sektor atau industri yang sangat menonjol soal ESG-nya. Jadi ini bukan something yang terlalu aneh, terlalu asing buat teman-teman di life insurance. Tapi kita bisa lihat di sini bahwa 90% dari eksekutif indicated bahwa boards-nya itu fokus and ensuring company-nya delivering ESG goals-nya. Gitu ya. 85% bicara soal mereka driving sustainable work practice across the supply chain. 88% bilang bahwa mereka drive equal pay untuk laki-laki maupun perempuan gitu misalnya. Dan governance-nya 50% dari companies ensure bahwa board-nya punya KPI on ESG. Nah, jadi teman-teman, Bapak dan Ibu, saya pikir ini adalah tantangan buat teman-teman di life insurance. Sekali lagi ada 4 hal you will face atau kita sekarang facing challenge in attract and retain gitu. Yang kedua kita harus mengoperasionalisasikan flexible working karena eksekutif mindset kita berbeda dengan apa yang di-expect oleh employee. Yang ketiga, skills kita harus diperbaiki gitu. Kita mesti rekrut based on skill, promoting based on skills. Jadi skills based HR. Dan yang keempat, we need to deliver on ESG. Nah, Bapak dan Ibu terima kasih banyak. Saya akan hand over ke Candy, di mana Candy akan bicara soal bagaimana kita sebaiknya melakukan merger dan acquisition. So Candy, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Candy Dai from Mercer's M&A practice, and I realize I'm the last person standing between everybody and lunch. So I'll make this painless for everyone and try to make it quick. Just before I kind of get into it, I wanted to share a little bit just within the Mercer, which I'm sure everyone is familiar. There is a M&A practice that specializes in supporting organization in merger and acquisition and divestment. So we specializes in doing HR due diligence, to getting to day one readiness, to integrating and getting ready for separation. Part of the reason that I'm here today, and I think those in insurance industry are no stranger to merger and acquisition, just given the amount of market consolidation that we've seen happening over the past few years. But in particular, because the regulation around sharing insurance that potentially would require a lot of insurance companies to consider either separating the business into a separate legal entity or potentially looking into, divestment, potentially consolidation of the business. So I wanted to share a little bit around best market practices, some of our learning from supporting organization in the divestment journeys, to hopefully will be helpful to everyone here. So I think starting with a joke, I think we always say this, when you're buying a company, when you're looking at due diligence and making acquisition, it's like dating, right? You're trying to find out what each other like, what they have, what skeleton they have in the closet. And then when you're merged and you wanted to do integration, it's like marriage. So you're trying to figure out how do we work together, who is going to stay, what's the most efficient way for us to operate as one organization. And now when you get into divestment or separation, that's like divorce. None of them is easy, but they definitely do get quite messy whenever you're doing divestment. So there's a lot of ways of doing it, and then everything, and I think I think being at Mercer, being M&A for many years, there is no one solution that fits any particular deal. Every deal is different. But I think the question and how more effective HR can support a company in their strategic thinking around the sharing insurance is really what's a long-term strategy, right? Like we all understand there's a need to separation. And separation could just mean that this business is in a separate legal entity, but we still operate together going forward. Separation might mean that we wanted to separate to meet the regulatory compliance, but down the road, this might be something that we were thinking of selling, right? Then in that case, the way you want to separate is you want it to have as little entanglement as possible. So you want to think about long-term strategy. What's the most effective way for me to sell to make this business attractive, to fetch the most value when I'm doing this? And the last one is really, well, we're not even going to separate. We're looking for a potential buyer who is interested to take over this business. Then it's really about supporting that sales process. Who is going to go as part of the deal, defining a scope internally and understanding what support the company needs to provide. So there's many different strategies in terms of how much separation you need to do. So it's important to understand what the long-term business strategy is, to understand what HR will need to support. And then the other thing is really to think about, well, separation is easy, but how do I separate, right? Like when you have a larger organization, there's a certain way you do things, right? Like how your HR function is structured, how your finance, how you have, center of excellence. But it doesn't necessarily work when you have a smaller organization. So everything needs to be rethought through, redesigned, thinking about is it fit for scale? Can we just clone and go and make sure everything is the same in the small organization, or does that actually not make sense? And some of the functions and roles need to be consolidated, rethink through. So it's important to kind of establish that strategy early on, because in our experience in a divestment, it's not a 1 month journey, right? Like it's potentially a 6 month journey. So it's important to have all the key stakeholders, business stakeholders, HR stakeholders, all align in terms of this is our business strategy, this is our preferred model, so that when you kind of get into the actual separation, making the nuanced, nitty-gritty decisions, you're making sure that you're always coming back to your guiding principle of how we're going about to do the separation. All right, so I will share a little bit more. If you can go to the next slide. Broadly, I think we have sort of put this into 6 buckets, right? And depending on the actual transaction, different items in different buckets, some might be more important, some might be less. But the very core is really, first you need to understand who is going to get separated, right? Who will get moved into the new organization? Define the people parameter. And this might involve in what's the org design going to look like for this organization? How does it going to operate on its own independently, right? You're looking at who are the people, who are the shared services people that needs to move over, who are the shared service people that would stay. You need to look at who are the leadership that will be moved. And often in times that means that redefining roles and responsibilities and reporting relationship for a lot of people. Once you have people and organization, I think that's almost the one thing you have to do regardless how your business strategy is. Even if the decision is say, we're not even going to put it in a separate legal entity, we're just going to find a buyer for this business, you still need to define who are the people going to be in scope for the transaction. Now, second is about total rewards. And I think one thing that's particularly jumped out for us oftentimes is executive compensation, right? Like if your leadership team has, their KPI is going to change in a new organization. If they have any equity plans or long-term incentive, how does that plan get carried forward into the new legal entity, and what's the new KPI and design makes sense for those organizations. So even though you're doing separation, you still want to make sure that people are engaged and they're engaged and they're incentivized to do the right thing for the organization. So oftentimes it gets quite tricky when you're looking at the leadership and the executive compensation and making sure you right size it and making sure you redesign it so it's effective going forward. In terms of employee benefits, I think by and large is relatively straightforward, but often in times, some of the organization issues they've dealt with is that, for example, they say we have a very comprehensive employee benefits. We have flex benefit design. Employees are really engaged. But now, if I'm taking like 1/10 of the population, putting a new organization, and I say I want this to have completely separate employee benefits because my plan is to sell this organization, right? So I want to make sure when I'm selling this on day one, employee still have benefits and have coverage. So in that case, what your current plan design might have may not necessarily work, either for economic reasons or just from an administrative perspective. It's no longer feasible for a smaller population. So it's important to think through what makes sense, even from an employee benefit perspective, and to the extent if you need to make changes, how that will be communicated, how will employee take it, So that sort of leads to the next point around employee experience. And I cannot emphasize this enough, really, because every time I think I talk to a client who's gone through a merger, we say, well, how are you managing changes? They're like, don't worry, we don't have to, because we're just buying this company, but we're not changing it. So we're not going to, there's no need to communicate change. But just understanding any change in organization is a change to employees, right? Even if you buy a new owner, there's no change to my, compensation benefits reporting relationship. It's still a change. How do I fit into the new organization? What does this mean, right? So it's important to bring the employees along with the journey, no matter what the changes are. Even if there's no change, we said, look, you should still have a session to tell employees there is no change, re-emphasize that, and help them feel at ease in terms of how they're going to fit into the new organization, new legal entity. So it's important to manage employment experience through all this. And I think that's often in times quite challenging in an M&A situation because, often in times, employee will not know much about what the corporate decision is, right? In a merger and acquisition, and they found out on day one when the deal is announced, and it is a shock, right? So there's a lot of companies that's debating, to what extent do we want to let employee know about the changes, and to what extent we bring them along with the journey. And there's no right or wrong answer, but I think what we generally advise a company is that be as transparent as you can and be as timely as you can. So you can make employees feel like they're a part of the journey. And they're aware of what's going to happen to them. And then you set expectation to them in terms of what more information is going to be communicated. So they don't feel like they're being left in the dark and having someone else to completely deciding their fate without any knowledge. I won't go into details on some of them, but I think in terms of thinking of separation, I think it's important to kind of understand from a technology perspective too. Like a lot of times we have a comprehensive HRIS system, payroll, workday. How does that work in a separation, right? Like from a technology perspective, it might take a year or two to implement in some of the more comprehensive. It might take quite a few months. But I think often in times in a transaction where I've seen technology is not always completely separated, you might ring fence the existing system. But another way for an organization to do it is consider a transaction service agreement that your parent company will still support the administration of certain technologies, in particularly where you're thinking the sale is going to happen in the near future. So there's definitely a lot of ways and legal negotiation terms that could happen that will support. But I think depends on what you use and what strategy you use. Always depends on the timing and how complex the current organization structure is. And last one, I'll just be really quick, is around project management and governance. And I think this sometimes gets neglected, but I will tell you after living through many billion-dollar global transactions is that having a proper rigorous project management and governance process is always key in any successful integration or divestment. Okay, so I think we can move on to the last slide. I just have one more. And again, I want to talk about it. I think some of them we've already shared. But I think in general, there's important things around separation. And to me, the most important thing is that you want all the stakeholders to be aligned at the beginning. And if it's a 6-month journey, people will leave. There's going to be new people added into your organization. Sometimes people can go down the rabbit hole in terms of decision-making process. So it's important to have a consistent project management that bring everyone to the same table, understanding here is how we will make decisions. here's what's important, here's what's relevant, and let's make sure we're together throughout this journey in a consistent manner. And I think oftentimes we see divestment doesn't go well, or the timeline gets delayed, or people are very upset or leaving the organization because have no clarity in what's the go forward structure. It's usually because there's no consistency and rigorous project management throughout the process. So I think it's like, to me, honestly, that's number one. I think you have that. Everything else, it's fairly self-explanatory. And last thing is just really think about employees, employee communication, employee experience. Think about the culture, right? What that's mean to you, to the new organization. Is it going to be a new culture that you're trying to embed? Or is it something that you wanted to make sure there's continuation and continued appreciation, collaboration going forward? So, so I'll pause here. I know I'm almost at time. Everyone's hungry, so am I. Any questions so far?
Thank you, Ms. Candy Dai.